What's going on, guys? Alric Phoenix, and today I'm not talking about gameplay or anything like that. Today I want to talk about the video game industry, video games in general, and I want to touch on a specific topic, and that is equality and representation in video games. Um, this entire topic came about because there's a conference coming up about women in video games. And one thing that I enjoy talking about is actually quite a bit with my wife is equality. It's I think it's interesting, and I think it's definitely something that can be reviewed and addressed in video games. But for me, equality doesn't stop at women. It also applies to racism, racial representation inside video games. So this may be a two-part video because I don't want, to put out a 25-minute video or something. So I'll probably break it up into two parts. But this first part, I would like to touch on exactly what I'm going to talk about and what I mean by not why I don't want to just talk about just racism or just lack of racial diversity versus lack of female diversity. Just started off, part of the reason that this is only kind of coming up now, and say this wasn't brought up, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, well, video games are relatively new. In general, up until 25, 23, 22 years ago, what represented a person, a character, was pretty pixelated. It's hard to represent, this is clearly someone from, Australia or Japan or India or Canada, because when you have, a 8x8 set of pixels to work with. It wasn't until, I would say, later, mid Super Nintendo really is when accurate representation of people and characters started coming more to the forefront. Games like Street Fighter 2 is a great example. A lot of those kind of games is where you'd see a lot more representation of the actual human form come into video games, and it was not common before then. Everything was kind of like Mario, where everyone was really small and jumped around, had no real gender or race. But it started around mid 90s, early 90s, and it's gotten a lot more. Our graphics have gotten better. We've been able to represent the human form much better. And as a result, we're now seeing a representation of real life put into games, and unfortunately in some cases that is a little skewed to be either male dominated or white dominated or whatever. Right off the top, let's be I want to be fair on this, in that there are absolute exceptions. One of those exceptions where it frankly doesn't make sense, I suppose, to have women in the game, and that would be sports games. It also applies to racial diversity in sports games because it is designed to be an accurate representation of the sport. Cricket, there's a very clear representation of each and every single player. Same with American football, same with any FIFA game or NHL game. You're not seeing female characters because the teams that are currently playing in the NHL don't have women on the team. They have Matt Sundin and things like that, and I don't know any football players. I literally just exhausted all my sports knowledge with that one. Does that mean that there shouldn't be, female hockey games, female soccer games? No. There's absolutely a place for those. Unfortunately, they're not being made, and that does come back to a lack of equality in how people view female-dominated sports, and particularly how culturally we view female-dominated sports. But in general, sports games are relatively racially equitable, based often on the fact that the players, if you look at American football games, a significant amount of the players on football are black. Hockey, a lot of white dudes. But in general, it's not really about equality when it comes to the sports games. Where you'll see a lack of representation is actually significantly in role-playing games. RPGs, you see it pretty predominantly. It's you'll end up often with teams of characters, you know, between 5 and 10, where it'll be, if there's 10 characters, you'll have maybe 3 women and 7 men. All of them are white, or perceived to be white. That kind of touches on something else, because you know, you want to call that, you know, well, geez, no black people in a game. Well, that's kind of, you know, ridiculous. Don't you have black people? But in Japan, statistically, they have the least amount of minorities. You know, black people, Caucasian people, Indian, etc. There are significantly less due to the country's not unwillingness to really bring in a lot of outsiders. In general, Japan doesn't want to have a lot of outside influence. You know, this is a cultural thing, so it's not a surprise that their games reflect the fact that they don't have a lot of racial diversity. In terms of their equality, particularly in terms of representation of women, though, they have a lot of work to do. You'll find that over the last 20 years, in terms of how we've been able to portray women, in this case, I'm going to talk about women for a second, and Japan and Japan's games. Often, in the games released in the last 10 years, particularly among role-playing, you'll find that women are displayed as, frankly, kind of infantile, childlike, very innocent, with very breathy voices, and you know, they kind of always feel they're always in that rescued stage. Japanese culture has kind of shifted women over the last 20 years from, you know, having strong leads, strong characters, to being almost unable to even cope with reality on their own end. It's a little ridiculous. It is a little ridiculous, but that's their burden to try to work towards. Anyways, but you can't always blame what goes on in Japan, particularly because the divide between the sexes, especially when it comes to games, is perceived, at the very least, to be extremely high. Where, you know, it's a really only a guy thing to play games in Japan, which, you know what, it's fair. It's a fair assessment in North America, you know, but the divide is a little less, and we have seen a lot of stats of a lot more women, in fact, many women playing video games, a lot more stepping in more into the hardcore realm than staying purely in the, you know, they're playing Tetris or Minesweeper or Solitaire or something like that, but they're fully, you know, kicking our ass in Call of Duty. Whereas you'll find, you know, in RPGs and in Japan, you know, women are relegated to object status. You know, women in games end up in a fun little niche. Outside of RPGs, when you see women in games, they're put into often two camps. And again, completely away from RPGs. That is the camp of, it's just a dude with tits. The dude with tits is a woman that's, you know, in the game, but they are so overtly macho and butch that, you know, they're desperately trying to be one of the guys. You'll see this. This is a good example, is the movie Aliens, the second Aliens movie, where one of the soldiers is a woman. She's got the biggest gun, she's got the biggest attitude, but she's a woman. You know, it's not quite an accurate representation of a woman in the military, but they want to make sure that, you know, women in military are displayed as the toughest as nails by being absolutely macho. You know, to be fair, men have the same role in military games as well. There's no such thing as, you know, a man with, you know, feelings of regret or remorse over what's happened, really, in military games. You only, you know, they shoot and they do what they're told. So, But oh, and the other woman is often, the breathy, still absolute sexual object that absolutely knows it, and there's no deviation from that. So, I think I'm going to end this as part one, and I will do part two, or upload part two tomorrow. So, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that we can talk about this some more. It's Alric Phoenix. I'll see you guys later.